We'll begin this hour with the deadly crisis in the Middle East. Talks of a ceasefire today after one of the bloodiest days of the conflict in Gaza. Over 100 people are reported dead there. 3 people in Israel have been killed. Israel Defense Forces continued airstrikes overnight while dozens of rockets were reportedly fired from Gaza into Israel. Today, UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon called for a ceasefire in Gaza, saying a ground operation there must be avoided.
While Israeli rockets may be aimed at military targets inside Gaza, they kill and injure civilians and damage civilian infrastructures. The loss of civilian lives is unacceptable under any circumstances. The excessive use of force is unlawful and must be rejected.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is sending warships near Israel. On board are 2,500 Marines. U.S. officials say they will be on standby in case Americans need to be evacuated from Israel. Now, the officials say the ships are not meant to serve any combat role, but the decision to send the ships signals a growing concern over just where the conflict is headed. For more, I spoke with RT International correspondent Paula Sleer. I first asked her if talk about the ceasefire has been any comfort for people there.
Well, it certainly is comfort because it is a sign on the horizon that what we've witnessed for the past 7 days is coming to an end. But it certainly doesn't mean that it's a long-term solution. We are hearing conflicting reports. On the one hand, Hamas is saying that a ceasefire has been agreed to and goes into effect from midnight local time Tuesday. But we're not hearing the same kind of statements being made by the Israeli government. They are calling for some kind of 24-hour delay period where they are calling for some kind of 24-hour period by which the situation can be assessed and they can determine whether or not Hamas is in fact serious about implementing this kind of truce. The Egyptian president, Mohamed Morsi, has said that he does expect the Israelis to stop their operation by the end of Tuesday. So the signs are there, the words are being said, a ceasefire is about to be implemented, if indeed it has not already been, and we just haven't been notified about it. But you need to remember that we're talking about sworn enemies. I mean, Hamas has on its charter the call for the destruction of the Jewish state. Israel considers Hamas a terrorist organization, and none of that changes despite the fact that a ceasefire is in effect.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is en route to the Middle East. Is there a feeling that this visit will really help resolve the conflict?
It's not necessarily that people here feel that the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's visit will help resolve the conflict, but certainly she will be the final impetus for this resolution for a ceasefire taking place. She will be meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. She'll then meet with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah. She will not be meeting with Hamas because the U.S. does also regard Hamas as a terrorist organization, and this has evoked a whole lot of criticism, particularly in the social media where I've been monitoring, with people saying, well, how really can the U.S. be involved in this conflict if they refuse to A, recognize and B, meet with one of the parties? But certainly we might be witnessing from the Israeli side a holding back in terms of saying, yes, we've agreed to the ceasefire until Hillary Clinton is in fact in the region. She might actually be the glue that brings this all together. But again, just to make the point that the U.S. is by no means regarded as a completely neutral broker. The sentiment in the region certainly is that the U.S. is backing Israel. President Obama from the start said that he did understand the Israeli position and that it was justified in terms of needing to defend its borders, which did not obviously go down well with Hamas. So you have the U.S. always being perceived, and perhaps rightly so, to have Israel on its side.
Well, certainly everybody that's been experiencing violence the past few days is hoping for peace. The UN is also seeking this peaceful resolution. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is discouraging a ground war in Gaza. Meanwhile, thousands of U.S. Marines are heading to the region. Paula, what kind of message is that sending?
Well, the message is that no one is neutral when it comes to any kind of involvement, particularly in the Middle East. I mean, you have the Egyptians who are a mediator, but certainly they have a very delicate line to balance in terms of, on the one hand, representing the growing call of the Egyptian people, which is essentially a sympathy and a brotherhood with Hamas, and on the other hand, not annoying the United States, which supplies so much funding to Cairo on an annual basis. The fact that you have, for example, the United States involved in this, again, not a neutral broker, very much seen as supporting Israel, always putting Israel's interests first. You have the United Nations, you mentioned Ban Ki-moon. He has been holding talks in Cairo, and he is now here in Israel as well. The United States is not necessarily viewed positively by either Israelis or Palestinians. The Israelis have always felt that the UN takes the Palestinian side, and the Palestinians, for their side, feel that the UN could do more. So depending on who you're talking about vis-a-vis the player in the international community, it comes with all that baggage, and it's perceived in that context. The fact that now you have these Marines coming to the region, again, only further entrenches the perception, particularly amongst Arabs and Palestinians, that the US is involved for self-interest, that the US friendship with Israel is partly a self-interest friendship. And so whatever your international brokers are doing is, at the end of the day, motivated by self-interest.
Okay, and certainly times have changed. You had mentioned Egypt, and right now there is this new Egyptian leadership with a closer relationship to Hamas than under President Hosni Mubarak. How is that affecting Egypt's role as mediator, a role Egypt has played in the past?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about this here in the region. I mean, you need to realize that the Egyptian president, Mohamed Morsi, was unable to say the word Israel up until a few days ago, and it actually slipped off his tongue. Whether it was a mistake or whether it was a tacit acknowledgement of Israel is something that has stirred the Israeli public opinion, and you can see a lot of that in the commentary pages of various newspapers. Egypt has come to the fore. It is certainly playing a central role, and this has always been the intention of the Egyptian leadership, was to put themselves back on the map. We would have seen a very different type of mediation happening if it was the former Egyptian president, Hosni Mubarak. Certainly it's well known that he was on the side of Israel. He did not carry the same kind of support, and he wouldn't have gone that extra mile with Hamas to try and broker some kind of ceasefire, or perhaps try and implement what we are witnessing now from the Egyptian government. But having said that, Morsi comes from the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an Islamist party, and he is under criticism for, in fact, having any kind of interaction with the Israelis, for trying to pacify the militants in Gaza. He is increasingly, interestingly enough, being seen as almost a more moderate voice than he was before this conflict began. So it's a very interesting development, just watching how the Egyptian leadership, and particularly that of the Muslim Brotherhood, has evolved, as indeed it has had to since it's come to government.
All right, a very delicate situation over there in the Middle East. Paula, thank you. That was RT international correspondent Paula Slier.